to the Mind Your Career webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Ramelfinger, and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. And I am delighted for today's webinar entitled Looking Forward and Backward, Planning for Career Growth in Service Firms and Corporations in 2019. Today's speakers are law school alumna Karen Kaplowitz, who graduated in '71, and Evelyn Rodstein. Karen is the president of the new Ellis Group and has over 25 years experience as a trial attorney. And Evelyn is an executive coach, consultant, and author. Evelyn shared with me her UChicago connection is an uncle who graduated from UChicago and went on to be the head of MIT's political science department. He was a brilliant man who anticipated computers' impact on political stability and instability throughout the world. It is my pleasure to welcome both of them to today's presentation and to hand the controls over to them.
Thank you, Rachel. This is Karen Kaplowitz. I am a proud alum of the University of Chicago Law School and was delighted when Rachel invited me to do a webinar on career planning for 2019. Because I work primarily with partners in law firms to help them become rainmakers, I extended an invitation to Evelyn Rodstein, who is a coach for executives, so we could provide you in this webinar with two perspectives, both in planning for career growth in law firms and other professional service firms and in companies. Evelyn?
Good morning. I'm Evelyn Rodstein, and I have an executive coach and leadership development company. Before that, I was global head of leadership at 4 Fortune 100 companies and KPMG. And prior to that, I was an individual and family therapist. And prior to that, I was an art history major. So I am delighted to talk about career development because I think all of you on the call have interesting and exciting challenges ahead of you. And we're not sure where any of our careers will land, but we want to be doing good work.
So we'd like to know a little bit about you, and we've asked Rachel to do a poll to let us know who you are. So Rachel?
So our first poll is, where do you work or where are you planning to work in 2019? And there are 5 options: a law firm, a small corporation, 1 to 100 employees, a medium-sized corporation, 100 to just under 1,000 employees, or a large corporation over 1,000 employees, or a nonprofit or public sector company.
While we are taking this poll, we're doing this because career development and how you operate successfully in organizations varies a great deal if you're at a startup or a giant company or a nonprofit. So we thank you for giving us the information so we can shape our comments.
And the results are in. So 5% of those on the call today are from a law firm, 9% are from a smaller company, 27% from a mid-size corporation or company, 36% from a larger corporation, 23% from a nonprofit or public sector.
Thank you.
And we have a second poll that we're launching, which is, how long have you been in the workforce? And there's only 2 answers for this one: less than 10 years or more than 10 years. And we'll only need another, I see that a lot of us have voted, so we'll just give this another 5 seconds or so for the last few folks to weigh in. And you can see that 71% of those on today's call have been in the workforce for over 10 years, and 29% have been working for less than 10 years.
Thank you. That's terrific.
Well, as somebody who works with lawyers, I'm glad to see that all the lawyers in the Chicago alumni community are busy at their jobs, filling time for their law firms. So let's get started with our first topic, which is looking backwards. And that is, what can you learn from what happened this past year that will help you plan for 2019? This is a time of the year when I spend a lot of time with my clients looking backward to prepare them for things like their business plans for 2019, as well as their self-evaluations and their meetings with their compensation committees. So the first thing that I always suggest is that people start by looking at what they plan to do at the beginning of the year. You know, when you meet with people and talk about what's going to happen next year, you may not be thinking about what you promised to do this year, but you can guarantee that many of them will have in mind what you said you would do. So the first thing that's really important is to go back to whatever you submitted a year ago or whatever you created a year ago to look at what you committed to do. What was your plan? Were you planning to expand work from your existing clients if you're a lawyer, or to develop certain new business? And was that successful? Were you able to secure new clients if that was on your plan? And were you successful? And if you planned to get support from specific people in your organization, did you get it? Were you able to accomplish that objective? And if you didn't, are you currently identifying new sources of support? So these are the kinds of questions that I raise with lawyers typically at this time of the year. And I'm interested, Evelyn, on how you counsel executives in the companies with whom you work.
Thank you, Karen. What's interesting is companies today are so different. There are companies like Accenture that don't have usual performance reviews. They do them quarterly. There's companies that throw away ratings. You could be in a startup where they haven't even put those systems in. So my comments are going to be at a slightly more conceptual scale, but I think at the end of the day, they're very practical. I spent 25 years managing large departments in Fortune 100 companies, and the pressure on me for speed and executional excellence was dramatic and exhausting. But what I always had to do and taught our executives to do was to pause and reflect and think about not only what you've accomplished, but what you've learned, and not only what you're going to do next, but how you're going to learn while doing it. There's a concept called learning agility, and you'll get materials on this later from the Center for Creative Leadership. Warner Burke from Columbia talks about this as well. And what you want to be through your entire career is learning agile. You want to reflect on past experiences, you want to experiment with new experiences, and you want to seek feedback. The worst thing in the world is to keep doing and doing and doing, and then you look back the last 10 years and realize you've been doing the same job for 10 years and you haven't learned anything. It doesn't make you promotable. And people can become what they call block learners, and they get stuck in a job and stuck in a space, and nobody expects them to do anything. There's new knowledge on this now by Carol Dweck on a growth mindset, but I find learning agility very interesting because it's very tactical. So when you think about your performance review, make sure your manager, when you talk about him, you want to talk about what new assignments can you get that you'll learn from? What does he think or she think you've learned this year? And create goals that are going to stretch you with your manager. Create learning goals. And if you are a manager, because many of you on this webcast have a lot of more than 10 years experience, you want to encourage that in your people because it's going to get them to commit and be excited and do the work. And if you're an employee with a manager who isn't comfortable with this language, try and make it as concrete as possible. What can I do that can help the company, but also give me an opportunity to learn? And if you look back on my year, where do you think I've grown? What have I learned? And what could I do better? Thank you. I think we're going to talk now about learning about how to identify and build relationships with key internal stakeholders in your organization, which is your other source of learning. And it's different in professional services quite often than it is in companies. You need to identify, in order to get any work done in a big organization, who can provide you information, access, and learning. And I often sit down when I'm coaching people in an organization to create an influence map because they're surrounded by people, they're responding to requests all day long, and they really should think about who are the key people in their system that are going to help them succeed and who are going to help them learn. And it isn't always peers and bosses, it can be subordinates. And when you create that influence map, you have to think about how you're going to use it. And you want to think not just what they can do for you, but what you can do for others. It's very important that it's a two-way process, that you have information and knowledge and feedback you can give to them. The other thing I always advise my corporate clients is seek out people who are different from you. You will learn. If you're in the CFO function, find somebody in marketing. If you're in marketing, find somebody in technology. It's very important to learn from people who have different conceptual frameworks about how work does and how the company operates. That will give you broader skills that will help you take broader jobs in the future. Karen, how does it work in a law firm?
So in law firms, some of it's fairly obvious that who the key stakeholders are. Other professionals in law firms are obviously among the key stakeholders for any professional in the firm. One of the things one paradigm that I think is really important for professionals in professional service firms, is to treat other professionals like you would treat an external client. Because at the end of the day, the other professionals in the firm, especially the ones who provide you with the work flow that you get, the assignments that you get, they are in effect like a client, and they deserve to be treated in that kind of way. Another key group are people who are mentors, and many professional service organizations are pretty structured these days about assigning people to be mentors. In my experience, though, many assigned mentors are not necessarily the only mentors who are available, and not necessarily the best mentors, because somebody who's just randomly assigned to be a mentor isn't necessarily aligned with your interests or your needs. So it's always important to seek out mentors in addition to anybody who happens to be assigned to you. Another group of key stakeholders are clearly in professional service firms, the practice group leaders. Now, the practice group leaders might be broken down by the nature of the work they do. There are also often industry group leaders, and those can be as important or more important than the subject matter expert group leaders. Another category of people who are very important to seek out and to have relationships with are peers. Peers are important because they know where you are. They know what you're going through. They have a special empathy and type of experience that can be very, very useful. Another important group of stakeholders are staff. So if you're a professional in a professional service firm, you do not want to neglect the importance of the staff. I think back on my own career, and one of the things that I was really proud about as a new lawyer is when my very first legal secretary, who was active in a legal secretaries association, nominated me to be the boss of the year in her group. And she and I were both really excited when I was selected, because I was the first Queen Boss of the Year. Every year until then, this is the early 70s, there had been a King Boss of the Year. And this was a time when women were entering the legal profession, and that was really important. But it's just an example of the importance of the staff with whom you work to form key relationships. The most important thing is to understand what the people who are your key stakeholders, need from you. Of course, the most important thing they need is that you do great work, that you're reliable, and that your work is excellent. But they may need more things. They may need your help in building their brands and your firm's brands. They may want support from you in writing and speaking. If they are leaders in professional or business associations, they might want your help, which would be very useful in your career, to support them in their work in their organizations. And another area in which many of you can be especially useful to stakeholders who are more senior than you is in help in using social media. I'm sure that any of you who have offered help to a more senior person in your organization on social media has found that that offer of help has been very welcome. And another thing to keep in mind is that just as you would if you were dealing with an external client, it's really important to stay top of mind. So even with the people you have identified as your key stakeholders, you need to think about how do you stay top of mind? Can you sit with them at a meeting in the office? Can you invite them to an event to join you? Can you share with them things that you've written or places you're going to speak? That's a very key thing to do with all of your key stakeholders. So we're now going to move on to our next topic, which is how to keep learning and broadening your skills portfolio. Evelyn?
Yeah, Karen has talked a lot about how this is done in professional services, and a lot of those principles apply in corporations and nonprofits. I want to talk about the risk-taking part of this, and it is a risk because we are paid for doing our current jobs well, and the company needs for us to do them well. However, if we don't take smart risks, we don't grow. For me, my giant risk was going from being 40 hours a week of individual and family therapy to a giant Fortune 100 financial service institution and not understanding very much about what they were talking about, but able to take the principles of development and goal setting and apply it and transfer that knowledge. And it built my career, and I was very quickly a managing director. So risks work well. You can't always take that kind of risk. So how do you take small risks? You want to seek projects and experiences outside your comfort zone. And you can do those in small ways. And if you do them, you want to make sure you have someone who's giving you the feedback you need to have to make sure you're successful. You want to have the confidence to take those thoughtful risks. Morgan McCall wrote a long time ago something called the Lessons of Experience, and he created 10 key experiences that were important for people to keep growing in their career. And I'm not going to recite all 10, but some of them were taking on a mess or turnaround, taking a geographically different assignment, taking a growth assignment, being demoted and having to deal with failure, all different assignments. So look for varieties of assignments that are going to stretch you. And when you take those assignments, what I would do and what I coach my people to do is to preset expectations, to say to the manager, I know this is out of my comfort zone. I know I'm going to be learning new things. And can I rely on you to keep giving me the feedback I need so that the team can be successful? I also think pro bono, if your corporation is a place where you just can't take those risks right now, pro bono is a great way to learn. In nonprofit boards are a wonderful way to learn how companies and organizations work. And looking for role models to emulate. And look, if you can't move, look at the bosses who are really great bosses. Look at the leaders who are really great leaders in your company and see what they're doing. See how they communicate messages. See how they make tough decisions. See how they inspire a troop. and see how they balance the conflicting demands. Because when you're running a corporation, everybody wants resources. See how they manage that. And you will learn a lot just from careful observing if you're not in the position right now to move. The other tip, which I always give, because the fields are all merging today. The fields we're looking at today are going to be different in 10 years. What is marketing going to look like? What is data analysis going to look like? What are the sciences going to look at? When I look at the companies, we don't know what those jobs are going to be. So the more you work with people outside of different fields, the more it will spark new and creative solutions. So I would say start now. And if you're managing, help your people to do all of the things that Karen and I discussed. So we're going to switch over to Karen.
No, we're going to talk about law firms a little bit and talk about broadening your skills portfolio if you're in a law firm.
Yes.
So one of the key elements of broadening your skills portfolio is to find the right mentors. So some of those people in a professional services firm are people who are really good at what they do because they can teach you a lot about doing your core job. But in addition to that, it's also really important to find mentors from whom you can learn in other categories. So if you're in a professional service firm, whether you're an accountant or a lawyer, you not only want to find people who are skilled at giving good advice and giving good services to their clients, you want to find people who are good marketeers. You want to find the people who are rainmakers, who have built strong practices and have risen in the ranks. Those are additional people who will teach you really important skills. And another category of people from whom you want to learn are people who are good project managers. I have observed over the years that the very best lawyers, and those are the people who I've mostly observed, are not only good technically and substantively in the law, but they are also great project managers. They can take on a really challenging transaction or a really big lawsuit, and they can break it down and pull together a team and manage the team really effectively. And another part of being a really great project manager in a professional service context is being a really good communicator with your clients so that they know what's going on and can track what's happening and, of course, what's costing. I want to go back to what Evelyn suggested with respect to stretch assignments and taking risks. One of the things that I've observed over the years in the law firm context is that pro bono work has an enormous value to lawyers in providing stretch opportunities. So for myself as a young lawyer, I volunteered to work with a group of ACLU lawyers on an investigation of civil rights violations at the Women's County Jail in Los Angeles. And that one experience as a young lawyer taught me just an enormous amount because I was in a position as a young lawyer to take on probably more responsibility than I could in a more common situation in which I was the low person on the totem pole in a large team of lawyers in my big law firm. So that had just enormous value to me, including the value of connecting with a large network of people who later sent me legal work when I struck off on my own to start a small law firm in Los Angeles. So that is a lesson that I've learned personally and that I share with lawyer clients all the time. When you take on work on a pro bono basis, it not only enriches you because you're doing good work and serving other people, but it also stretches you professionally. The other idea that Evelyn raised is the idea of finding role models to emulate. And role models are different than mentors. So the idea here is if you're trying to figure out how to advance yourself in your job, in your company, or in your profession, who are the people that you can emulate? And what can you find out about them? So in the law firm context, it's actually fairly easy to do this because if you find somebody that you know is a star in an area that you are in or want to be in, you can usually pretty easily go online and get a pretty detailed picture of what they've done because lawyers print very detailed bios that include everything they've published, lots about the kind of work they've done, as well as all the organizations in which they're involved, especially ones in which they're leaders. It might be a little more challenging to get as much detail, but of course, we have the internet. There's an awful lot available online from LinkedIn and otherwise. But I share Evelyn's commitment to the importance of continuing ongoing learning and broadening your skills portfolio. Evelyn?
Yes, I think we're going to move now to how you actually get the feedback you need, because we've talked a lot about getting it. Karen's going to start by talking about how you get it in a law firm, and then I'm going to talk about how you can give it as a manager and also how you can get it as a subordinate. Karen?
Thanks, Evelyn. So one of the places on the subject of feedback that's important to start is the feedback that you're getting organically. So really, you don't have to go out of your way in the ordinary course of things to get an awful lot of feedback about how you're doing that will support your professional development. So the first place, of course, to look is on the compensation and promotion rankings that you're getting. So it's important to understand how your professional services firm or your company does compensation and promotions. It's important to pay attention to whatever information is available. So, some organizations are much more closed, others are much more transparent. At a time when many law firms, professional service firms, and companies are being scrutinized, for example, on gender pay equity or inequity, more organizations have become more transparent about some of those issues. So that's a place to start. You want to pay attention to what feedback you're getting from whether you're getting raises, whether you're getting bonuses, whether you're getting promotions. Another type of feedback that gives you a lot of information on how you're doing and how you're being received are what kind of assignments are you getting and who's giving you those assignments. So, it's not that the work you're doing should not be viewed as just kind of passive. You're waiting for people to show up and give you work to do. You want to be paying attention to who's giving you work, who could be giving you work, who are the people who might help you get the kinds of stretch assignments that Evelyn was talking about. So that's another type of feedback that you're getting organically. You don't have to go out of your way. You just need to observe and understand the significance. Another type of feedback is whether you're getting invited to join particular client teams or pitch groups. So in a law firm or professional service firm context, there are often teams of people put together to serve a particular client or a particular matter. And the question is, are you getting invited to the party? And if there are particular clients who are high value clients in your firm and you want to be on those teams, then the question is, how do you do that? How do you get to the people who are making those decisions so that you get the invitations that will advance your career? Another area, certainly in the professional service firm arena, that's really important are pitch groups. So in the professional service arena, who brings in work is of critical importance. And the people who go out and bring in the work are often the most highly valued and the most highly rewarded. So another thing to pay attention to in the way of how you are perceived in your organization is, are people seeking you out to be on the team when you go out to pitch for new work? So we also want to talk about, a more intentional effort on your part to get feedback. Evelyn, can you talk about being intentional about seeking out feedback?
Yes, and I want to underscore that everything Karen said is true in a corporate setting. Almost everything she said, except for the rainmaker part, perhaps if you're in a job that doesn't require that, is true. And what it means is slowing down enough from the day-to-day frenzy to reflect on your environment and how you're perceived. And reflection and slowing down and observing is the beginning of learning. I'm going to talk about how you go about seeking out feedback if you're in an environment where you're not getting it or getting it in the right way, or you have to give it. And I'm actually going to go to the tips first and then to the managers on board. I'm going to go through some techniques that are in the first part of the slide. Sometimes managers don't like to give feedback because they feel it's personal. So you need to ask in a way and say, I'm really interested in learning. And if you see behaviors that I'm doing or skills that I'm using and they could be better, can you let me know? And if you frame it in advance of an assignment, it gives them permission to tell you. One of the things people hate most is getting unasked for feedback. So if you give your manager, your peer, your subordinate permission to give you feedback, that's really, really important. It allows them to do it without feeling like they're threatening you. The second tip is never make it personal. You don't say to someone, you're lazy. You say, the last 3 assignments didn't come in on time. Should we take a look at what's going on? Make it about the behavior. The assignments didn't come in time. Don't make it about the assuming an intent that this person is lazy. This person may have been working day and night, but not effectively, or there might be a block in another department that isn't giving them the data. So it's very important not to use value judgments in your feedback, either for when you ask for it, for when you give it. But if you present this to your manager or in a way so that they feel comfortable giving you that feedback, if you are a manager and you give it this way, it's usually welcomed. Now, organizations that really have life on the line, like the military, have developed some very interesting ways of getting feedback. So I'm going to talk about what the military does, and then you can figure out how you put it into your organization. They regularly have post-mortems or after-action reviews after battles. And if you're coming back in a taxi after a presentation to a client, you can do a mini one and say, what went well in that meeting? What went poorly? Is there something we could have said differently that would have captured the client? Or what did we say that captured that client? You can also do it at the end of every project. In some of the more sophisticated companies, they're built into the end of each project. There is a post-mortem or an after-action review. One of the most dramatic stories I love to use on this is the Navy pilots. And I'm maybe not telling the story 100% accurately because I'm not a Navy pilot, but the Navy pilots had casualties and wanted to address it. So they had something after every flight called a nameless, rankless debrief. And the captain would take off his badge and they'd go around the room and say what went well and what went poorly on that flight. And in part, that helped with casualties. So that is the kind of feedback you want to seek in an organization. It's not judgmental. What could be right and what could be wrong. There's another one you can do at the start of a project called a pre-mortem. And in a pre-mortem, you actually start at the beginning of the project and say, we're putting in a big technology system. What could go right in the next 6 months, or what could make this go wrong? So you've actually been giving feedback before the project started. And it creates a conversation where feedback is permissible. And then there's one last one that's kind of fun. You can do it at offsites. I believe it's from Marshall Goldsmith, and it's called Feed Forward. And it's very quick, and it doesn't require a lot of design. And you actually ask people, I'm working on getting things on time done. Can you give me 2 ideas about how I could do that better? And you ask people. And the goal of Feed Forward is you don't go back and say, the last 3 projects you screwed up, you're blaming. You're putting the feedback forward. And almost anyone, if you ask them genuinely and you make it future oriented, usually has a good idea on how you can be better. So it can be, I want to learn more about project management. Do you have any ideas about how I could be doing that better? So Feed Forward is a quick, forward-looking way to get easy feedback.
I want to just comment on something that Evelyn said in her comment about post-mortems and how the Navy leader took off his badge or whatever. The idea is that you want feedback from everybody. You want feedback up and down the ranks of people in your organization. You want to give permission to people to give feedback to one another, no matter where they are in the rankings of the organization. And the other thing that comes to mind in connection with Evelyn's comments is a book called The Checklist Manifesto by a brilliant Harvard professor and doctor named Atul Gawande. And it's the same kind of concept of being thoughtful and analytical about what's going right and what needs to be looked at and considered. And, for so many of our jobs, both in the professional service sector, in the nonprofit sector, or in the corporate sector, some attention and analysis of what's gone right and what's gone wrong would take us to the next level an awful lot faster than we're otherwise going to get there. So at this point, Evelyn, do you want to add anything else before we ask Rachel to start teeing up some questions from the audience? Do you want to add anything else?
Yes. The one area that Karen and I have not addressed is actual knowledge areas that you have to identify to build your career. Some organizations have career maps where that's very specifically laid out. In public accounting, in technology, they will have various areas and they will tell you, you have to learn how to do an audit this way before you can move to the next level. You have to learn tax law this way. And so we haven't addressed that because our audience is too broad. And I know this has been very feedback centric, but we're both also suggesting that you also ask your managers, what are the content areas that I need to learn to stay current and to move forward in my job, especially if the company is more technically focused. And I think that's our comments.
Okay. So Rachel, can we get your help in inviting our audience to ask some questions?
Of course. And so folks, as you see it in your control panel, if you could write questions into that question box, and we'll go through them as we get them. A first question is, you both have worked as coaches, Karen, you with lawyers, Evelyn with corporate executives. Do you have any advice for when people should use coaches?
Karen,
I can start. I can start on that subject. And the answer is whenever you can. There are lots of organizations that provide coaching internally. Mentors and colleagues can serve as coaches. And, if you look at when athletes, for example, use coaches, they don't use coaches just when they're not doing well. They use coaches on an ongoing basis to get better. So the answer is coaches are a tremendous resource to you in moving ahead in your career. Evelyn?
And we've attached a video by Atul Gawande saying everyone needs a coach. And he talks about when he was a mid-career surgeon, he brought in a coach, another surgeon, who told him to keep his elbows down. Everyone can keep learning. But if you are going to invest in an external coach as opposed to an internal coach, it's a lot of hard work. You have to look at it as if you're investing in a personal trainer. You have the coach is going to push you. They're going to make you uncomfortable. They're going to ask you to explore issues. There may be 360 feedback involved where you're dealing with feedback from others. So coaching isn't someone holding your hand and telling you how wonderful you are. And let's talk about singing Kumbaya together. Coaching is actually very hard work between you and the coach to develop the skills, the inner confidence, and the leadership persona to keep thriving in a corporation. And most importantly, identifying your sense of purpose in terms of what you actually want to accomplish. So if you're going to identify an external coach, make sure you're ready for the work.
Great. And just a note for everybody, you can see on this PowerPoint slide, there are some resources that are available on this topic of coaching. It seems like, and also some of the things that Karen and Evelyn have mentioned. The PowerPoint along with this slide is in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, and you can download this PowerPoint and particularly this resource page for your own reference now up until when we close the presentation, and I'll also email that out to everybody. Another question is, any strategies for dealing with contradictory feedback? I'm getting different feedback from people at the same level and throughout the organization where I work.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And so one question I would ask is there a forum in which people who are providing contradictory feedback are jointly in a meeting in which you can tee up the questions that you have about the kind of feedback you're getting and get an on-the-spot reaction? One of the ways that I often recommend to people that they deal with difficult situations is to ask permission to raise the issue. So one of the ways you might raise an issue about contradictory feedback that you're getting is to say to one of the people, or to both if they're in the same place, can I raise a sensitive subject? Or to say, I'm confused. May I ask a question about some contradictory feedback I'm getting? You're telling me one thing, somebody else is telling me another. What can you tell me about this situation? But to invite people to talk about something that's a little bit difficult, it sometimes is helpful to couch it in terms of, I'm confused, or, can I raise a sensitive subject? Evelyn?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It happens a lot. I agree with everything Karen is saying. And I think the hard part is to say, are the situations these two people are experiencing you very different? If they are, if one person is looking at your analytics and another person is looking at your customer experience, they may be legitimate. It may be an and, it may be a plus. On the other hand, it may be related to the personality of your manager. And you have to be very careful not to make one wrong, okay? And say this person is wrong and this person is right. So presenting it as this is confusing or this is very interesting and I want to learn from it, but I'm getting two different sides of feedback here. Do you think it has anything to do with the situation with which we're working? And look at it as an and, not an either or. Because once it's either or, you end up potentially creating conflict between the two managers who are giving you feedback, which is not what you want.
Another question that's come in is that comment that appreciate the statements you've made about looking for stretch assignments and for ways to develop in my role. How long should I stick it out in a job that I'm unhappy with and a position that I do not feel suits my gifts and skills?
Well, I think the answer to that is it depends. It depends in part on what the job market looks like. Like right now, what we're hearing in the news is that we're in a very tight labor market. So this is a time when you probably have more opportunities than maybe in a year from now if we go into a more recessionary economy, as has been predicted. So part of it is situational. What are your options, both in the external market and also within your own organization? Another question is, how long have you been in the particular position that you're in or with the particular organization that you're in? In the old days, people used to give advice that you shouldn't move around that much. I mean, certainly in a law firm context, if I were looking at somebody making a move and they bounced around a lot, that would be a negative. These days, I think there's more of an understanding that a lot of people move around a lot. I certainly hear, for example, that millennials are quick to pick up and move on. But part of the question is, in your industry, in your organizations, does it look bad if you've moved around relatively quickly? And that has to partly inform your judgment about how long you should stick around. Evelyn?
What I would add to that is my experience with law firms and public accounting is they do want you, continuity is important. If you're in a startup, you can move every 2 years, it's expected. In fact, many startups are built on the premise that everyone is going to outgrow their jobs and move, including the CEOs. So that moving is incredible. And being in a big corporation, which a lot of you are in, my own experiences is I think I went through 4 acquisitions I think I've been through so many acquisitions, or there's a merger or a divestiture or a change in CEOs, and suddenly the landscape changes. So if you look at your company and say, this landscape is going to be steady for the next 10 years, the management's going to be steady for the next 10 years, and I'm not moving anywhere in this organization, I might think outside the box. But some industries, there's a lot of motion, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of turnover, and those are in senior management, and those are some of my most wonderful learning experiences and some of my clients' wonderful learning experiences during a merger. They're suddenly working in a bigger job than they thought, or they're on a strategy committee, or they're in a new country. So look not only at your career trajectory, look at your company and see if it's going to be rock solid or it's going to be open to opportunities for change.
How do you think you should approach the subject of increases in pay and moving up within the company? Should you do this during the year-end review? How direct and proactive should you be when speaking to your manager?
Karen should go first on law firms, and then I'll speak.
Okay. Well, the question is, what's the nature of the system? But what I recommend to people is that they prepare for conversations. So in a law firm context, virtually all of my clients have a conversation once a year with a compensation committee. And so they need to get ready for those conversations. And what I recommend to people that they do to get ready is to get as much data as possible. So they need to understand, what were the expectations? If they were supposed to bill 2,000 hours, how many hours did they actually bill? If they were expected to do an additional 400 or 500 hours of business development, did they do that? Or did they meet whatever the requirements were for pro bono or community service of some kind? The other thing is I recommend to them that they get as much data as possible about what are other people who are comparable to them earning. And there are firms, I'm working with a very large national law firm right now that provides full transparency to the partners in the firm about everybody's compensation. So I recommend to my clients in that context that they get their own data points and then look at who else is doing something comparable to them and what are those people earning, so that they're prepared for a conversation. And the answer to whether to raise the subject is absolutely. I mean, the question is, especially in a setting in which there's a conversation that's scheduled to talk about compensation, it's expected that you'll be asking questions. And if you're uncomfortable, advocating for yourself, it's another way to approach it is to find other people who will advocate for you. So you might, for example, if you know you're going to have a conversation coming up, ask somebody that thinks highly of you to put in a good word for you in advance. That's another kind of strategy that often is helpful. Evelyn?
Yes, every company has a different compensation philosophy. So this becomes a complicated answer depending on the company you're working with. In some companies actually disassociate the performance review from the compensation decision. So you're in two different conversations. So first thing, find out in some way, either formally or informally, what the compensation strategy philosophy is for your company. And if you can get market data from the outside, that is great. Secondly, feel confident and objective about asking about compensation. It's not a favor somebody is doing for you, it's a reward. And thirdly, managers they're often forced rankings. They are fighting for compensation for their people with other departments, with other people. You have to show them that in some way you've gone above and beyond in order to get the best compensation. That you haven't just done the job in front of you, that you've added value, a secret sauce, an extra spice, something more. That gives you more leverage. And some companies, to Karen's point, use formal 360 reviews and add that to the compensation, which is very complicated. But a good way, as Karen said, is to get a few good people to say a few good things about you and to present it to your manager, and this is what's most important, as objective, as clear, as neutral. Frame the conversation. Don't make it an attack. Don't make it, why aren't you paying me enough? Frame the conversation. I understand we're in a corporation and compensation here can be complex, but my thinking is from what I've provided this year in terms of extra value, I should be considered for the highest range of compensation within that corporation's guidelines. So you keep it neutral and not personal.
The other thing to think about is if there's a problem about just getting more money, is there something else you can get?
Yes.
Is there, a bigger budget for marketing for your own group or for yourself? Are there other kinds of forms of compensation other than just salary? If you can't get a bump in salary because that's a problem, can you get extra stock options or something else. You want to give your managers as much flexibility to reward you appropriately as possible.
Including flex time, I would add to that, Karen. Sometimes people want the option to work from home a day a week, which can be invaluable to some people who have long commutes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wonderful. We have some more questions, but we're running out of time. So I want to end us with the question of, in one sentence, what would you say is the key takeaway from your presentation today?
So I would say that the key takeaway is to be thoughtful about planning for the next year, to think through what happened this past year, to think about how that impacts next year, to keep in the front of your mind the key stakeholders with whom you need to interact, and to continue a career-long broadening of your learning and your skills. Evelyn?
And I would add to what Karen is saying is, we know the world is going to get more complex, more volatile, more uncertain. You're thinking about your career. So the best tool you have is to keep learning on how to learn, and that requires reflection, getting feedback, new experiences. And you want to cut this down to this year's performance review and what you can do, but learning is lifelong, and I encourage you to keep thinking about that throughout a career that may take you to many places that you might not have thought you'd ever be. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen and Evelyn, for giving us this hour of insight into the steps we can take to better plan for 2019 and to evaluate ourselves. I just a reminder that you've shared all these resources that are before us, both as a handout in this webinar, and I'll also be emailing this PowerPoint to everyone who's attended today. So thank you, Karen and Evelyn, so much for this presentation. And thank you, everyone who's attended this webinar. This is our last program for 2018, but I encourage you to look back on our past programs throughout the year on our YouTube channel, which will be emailed to you all as well, and to come back in January for webinars to start off your new year right, planning for growing your career. We'll have webinars on resumes, relaunching a career, how to get promoted, the future of digital marketing, and a lot more in 2019. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.